Hey everybody, welcome to TYT Nation Interviews. I'm Jeff Waldorf, and I have a special guest with me today. I've got Mal Hyman. He is a Democrat running for the 7th District of South Carolina, as a professor of political science and sociology at Coker College, and he's running against Representative Tom Rice. I almost said Tom Price, but it's Tom Rice. So I want to throw to him now. Mal, welcome to the show.
Great to join you.
I appreciate you being here with me tonight and talking about the issues.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.
All right. So the first question that I have for you is, basically it's your standard question. Why did you decide to run?
For me, silence was betrayal. I think what's happening in Washington is even more alarming and appalling than it has been in the past, with the wealthiest 1% putting in 98% of the money and having a president that's reckless, impulsive, racist, sexist, Islamophobic. I've taught for 42 years. I couldn't just stay in the classroom. I had to speak out against him and speak out against the Tea Party Republicans, and that's what I've got in my district. I thought walking away from the Paris Climate Accords was a crime against humanity, so I'm all in.
That's good to hear. So you're now. I'm reading through some of the things that you stand for on your platform, and it's very, very progressive. I'm looking at the things you're in favor of Medicare for all, and climate change, doing something about climate change. And I just want to ask you about some of those positions and why you're taking these positions.
Sure. Well, Medicare for all, based on the Canadian plan, has been successful for more than 40 years. And even conservative Canadian businessmen wouldn't give it up. The way I argue it to the business community is that it's good for business and it lowers the national debt. And I change the language a little bit, and I tell people that you are free under the Canadian system to choose your own doctor. You are free to choose your own hospital, and it's run by the provinces. Here it would be run by the states. Everyone's covered. They live 3 years longer than we do at 2/3 the cost. So this is something that would invigorate the economy and give dignity to all of our people. I think health care is a human right. I think we ought to take the UN Declaration of Human Rights that we inspired. We should take it seriously. And I think in framing it as being good for business, it resonates more widely than some of the past efforts to try to get Medicare for all passed.
And that's true. When you're talking about national debt, when you're talking about the impact on business, because look, the truth is that we do spend a lot of money on, businesses themselves spend a lot of money on insuring their employees, and that's an expense that you could eliminate. That could actually lead to more job creation. That could actually lead to higher wages. So that's an important distinction to make. So that's actually really good framing on this issue when you're trying to reach a conservative audience. And look, when it comes to conservatives, polls out there have shown that a slim majority of Republicans are in favor of enacting a Medicare for all system and having government-funded health care. So now with like a majority of people now in favor of it, the only obstacle we have are people in Washington, people, of course, such as Tom Rice, who are in favor of a so-called market-based approach.
Sure, and this crowd is marinated in money and won't advocate for the public good. Elections are so expensive, and these people become career politicians. But the public, by significant margins, wants this type of change. I think the challenge for us in a media environment where legacy media is owned by billionaires and billion-dollar conglomerates, is to get a message through that'll be in the interest of large and small businesses as well as people. Most folks don't know anything about the Canadian system, mistake it for socialism. I think the British system works even better, but it's a tougher sell in the United States because in Britain, actually the poor in Britain have better health care than the wealthy in the United States, and they have better health if we look at a number of indicators. But that's a harder sell. I think the Canadian system can be made plain, but we don't see those specials on TV. We don't hear them much on radio. Legacy media won't help us spread this message, which I've been framing as common sense for the common good. And when Rotary clubs hear this, they like the ideas. I end up being the first person that's mentioned it in terms of Medicare for all being good for business and lowering the national debt.
Right. I mean, Medicare itself is incredibly popular. It's got somewhere around a 80% approval rating, somewhere around there. Right. And it cuts across all different party lines. So when you say let's expand Medicare for everybody, I think everybody's like, yeah, it makes sense. Why should we have to pay these high deductibles and incredibly outrageous premiums when we could have government-funded healthcare that could actually do it much more efficiently? I mean, right now, we spend, twice as much as, you mentioned Great Britain, right? We spend way too, twice as much as the UK does. Way much more than we should.
You're right. No other country tolerates this in the private marketplace for people to profit off of suffering. Now, what we're facing is about a $3 trillion industry that realizes they could be seen as just a protection racket, which I think is what they are. This is organized crime, and it's at the expense of business as well as the American public. And I think Bernie Sanders has done the country a great service by raising this issue in a different way. And I think the wind is at our back, and people are hungry for this type of change. So I'm glad to lend my voice to the chorus and try to clarify it to different communities. And the election allows you to do that.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the money in politics, the deluge of money. Your opponent, Tom Rice, one of its highest contributors in 2017 and 2018, the highest industries, is the insurance industry. He's received about $45,750 from the insurance industry. And of course, our system, that money equals speech. That's what they say anyway. I don't believe that. I believe money equals, hey, I give you money. It's essentially legalized bribery. We give you money, and then you do exactly what we tell you to do.
I couldn't agree more with you. In my 42 years of teaching, I mean, you sound like me in the classroom saying that. And I submit that Citizens United against the Federal Election Commission is the worst Supreme Court decision in this country since Plessy versus Ferguson. This has nothing to do with freedom. It allows the wealthy to get wealthier and rig the economy at the expense of the working class and the poor. And the system has grown more and more unequal, where we still have the worst inequality since 1928. And the system of campaign funding contributes to the inequality and less opportunity in this country. I couldn't agree with you more.
So something that's interesting, and you talk about that, that's pretty strong comparing it to Plessy Ferguson. I want to say that I believe that, and I've said it before on my show, that Citizens United is actually an extension of some of the earlier Supreme Court decisions that basically said that first, corporations are people, which is absolutely ridiculous. Corporations aren't people, and that money is speech. I believe that was, and I get these confused all the time, so forgive me, Bellotti versus First Bank, and I'm blanking on the other one for the moment. That always happens to me.
Vallejo.
Buckley Vallejo, thank you. Those two decisions really set up the framework for a Citizens United to be enacted. And afterwards, the McCutcheon decision, which took, what we had already and just amped it up on steroids. So that's what we're facing. We're facing an entire system that was set up to give corporations so much more power and so much more of a voice in our elections than regular people. It's not far to say, in my opinion, and you can disagree with it, that we are as close to an oligarchy as I think we can get.
I think we're drifting further that direction, and the way out of it, in my way of looking at things, is to have candidates not take any corporate or banking money, because you can't serve two masters.
Right.
And when you don't take the money, you're free and independent to say what needs to be said to those that would create profits and destroy the earth, which is what's happening with our decisions on fossil fuels and climate change, and would destroy the poor. Right now, 1 out of 5 kids is living below the poverty line. 50 million Americans don't know when they're getting their next meal. And we created a system where the wealthy, through this tax plan, got much wealthier. This is a crime, and this will be stopped when the public rises up. Most change comes from the bottom up, not from the top down in this system. And my sense is the wind's at our back, and people want much more significant change. I'm seeing it even in South Carolina, which is typically a red state, that people are liking that message, that 60% of the public is angry with both political parties, and about 2/3 of the independents are leaning Democrat at this point.
Yeah, I saw a recent poll about millennials. Most millennials right now are interested in a third party because they can see that the Democrats and the Republicans right now do not serve them because, as you mentioned, you cannot serve two masters. But interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders, again, and you mentioned him on, setting the debate for healthcare, he also set the debate for taking money. He took on the, most, well-known, establishment-backed candidate, Hillary Clinton, and did so without taking any corporate money, no super PACs. He didn't take a dime from the banks or anything like that. And he still, and in some months, outraised Hillary Clinton, and he did it $27 at a time. So that's really the model that I think we need to use going forward in further elections. We've got to get that money out. We've got to do something different. And we've got to expect our politicians to stop taking that money as well.
I agree completely. I think it's a prophetic moment for him. I think he did set the model. Last election cycle, I supported Sanders and was a surrogate speaker for him. He would have done much better in South Carolina, but he started late. Money from the Clintons sloshed around the state. And at the end, Sanders could see that he wasn't going to win. So in the pressure of a presidential race, he moved to spend time in other states. And then it was misinterpreted that since he lost badly with the black community, that his voice wasn't resonating. I was in a meeting of a number of African-American ministers here. This was 2 months before the primary. I guess 6 weeks before the primary. And Sanders carried the day with about 25 different ministers. They would ask him a question, and it was clear that he's been fighting this fight for a long time. He had a question on low-income housing, and he talked about it in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, when he was in Congress, when he was in the Senate, what he could do for this country now, because we have a 5-year wait for public housing in most big cities. And I can tell you, he carried the day. He just started late and didn't have as much money. I think his message in most areas is right where a lot of the American public is at, and he showed that candidates can win if they aren't taking that money. And we're going to have to wait until there's a constitutional amendment, it appears, because this decision was so bad from the Supreme Court. And in lieu of that, I think we can break through the stranglehold of big money by running campaigns like you had mentioned.
Yeah, I do want to mention a little bit about the primary, because you mentioned that, in that meeting, Sanders was killing it with the African American community. There was this common, and I guess there still is this common refrain, this common misperception that Bernie Sanders actually does terribly with African Americans. But you look at this Harvard Harris poll, for example, 73% of Americans are in favor of Bernie Sanders. He's the most popular politician in America. He's actually least favorable with white men. So that whole problem with the DNC, of course, casting a mischaracterization on Sanders during that race, and because of those disadvantages that he had because he didn't have money, because this system is all about money, it's all about name recognition. It definitely hurt him there. But you believe that you can capitalize on where he wasn't able to capitalize on, and to be able to reach South Carolinians with your message and the message that is similar to Bernie Sanders, correct?
I think so. I'm seeing it happen. The rallies are larger. The reception from people is much different, even from a year ago when I ran last time. The public has been alarmed and appalled, in part at what they have seen in Washington, so that a progressive message, which was resonating well when Sanders gave it, I think resonates even better now. I think the time is right. The winds are at our back, and we just have to be bold with our message, and people are coming around to it. I want to also go back to some of the things that happen uniquely in South Carolina that most folks may not be aware of. I mean, the congressman here, Jim Clyburn, had worked closely with the Clintons and was promised the position Secretary of Education. So the establishment within the black community was for Clinton, but as Sanders' message got out there, people started to see just how valuable and inspiring his ideas were.
Okay, and that's I mean, if you can reach the voters, if you can get past some of the other, these establishment figures in South Carolina and begin to reach people. I mean, take Virginia, for example. I mean, you're familiar with what happened in the Virginia races, right? Where you had people from the DSA win seats in Virginia, and it was a Democratic route. It was amazing. Do you believe that you can replicate that success with your campaign? And I do want to ask you what steps you're taking towards doing that, towards getting out your message.
I think it's possible. I think it's harder here because we haven't run a 50-state strategy, so we've inherited less money, less infrastructure. Our lists aren't as good. We don't have as many offices up. The state party is broke, so you have to overcome all of that. But all change is a fight, and we are gaining momentum. More and more people are hearing us. We're on shows like yours, and we're building a national following for a progressive voice, and I think people are hungry for it. And it's a question of experiments in democracy, where you find different ways of organizing. I'm finding I'm the first Democrat to go around to some of the African American churches, and I've got plenty of Sundays where I'm doing a church and hanging around afterward and talking with people, going to church picnics other times, and going to a range of events. We're also organizing in the classic sense of running panel discussions on everything from human rights to alternative energy to drug addiction and the opioid problem, where we're working with churches, or I'm at the college that I'm at, and we're trying to get people to think about different issues in a more critical way, and build some of our lists in the process. We have been going around working with the strongest groups in the region in order to show solidarity with them. I was very pleased and gratified that I got to be the keynote speaker at the AFL-CIO convention this past year, and pleased to have that support. So on passing out literature at shift changes at midnight, the head of the AFL-CIO was with me. And if I might tell a story, Jeff, we would hand out the literature, and people in pickup trucks that looked like they may well be Trump supporters, we said we still need to drain the swamp as we were handing the palm card to them. And I said, I'm not taking any corporate or banking money. You can't serve two masters. I've been a teacher for 40 years. I think it's time for an outsider. Everybody was taking my palm card. People wanted to hear that it was an outsider that was running clean, that was going to try to take on the establishment. And I think that's a wide political opening for progressives this time. And I think we're looking at a wave election that's like what we had after Watergate, because the noose is tightening around Trump, and I think he's going to look worse and worse. Looks like he's actually deteriorating, and he can't handle what's going on. And more of the public is going to be able to see him for what he is, which will create a political opening for progressives.
We can definitely hope so. I mean, look, I believe the only reason that Trump had gotten elected is because in a way that he did offer change. Now, he's also a demagogue, so obviously he painted up these enemies, the Muslims and the immigrants, and they're coming to steal our jobs and all that stuff, and then said, oh, don't worry, since I know the problem, I'm going to fix it, right? So he demagogued his way into office, there's no doubt about that, but he did offer something that was different than the status quo. The problem I had with the Hillary Clinton campaign is, and the Democrats that were running in 2016, or I should say a good chunk of them, is that they didn't run on anything. They didn't run on change, they ran on the status quo, and that of course goes back to the issue of money in politics. Because the people that think that the status quo is good are the people that are making money off of the status quo. These are the people whose lives are already really good. They're not having problems paying the bills. They're not having issues with crushing student loan debt. They're not having problems being able to afford their medication every day. They're not having the same problems that regular working people are having, and especially people in South Carolina. I mean, there's the opioid epidemic, which is hitting everywhere. That is affecting, millions and millions of people, and they want relief. They are crying out for change, and Donald Trump is a con man. He went in there and said, don't worry, I can deliver change. And, well, we've seen what kind of change he's delivered. Basically, none. He's got the richest cabinet in history. He is a complete disaster and a mess, and he is allowing the Republicans, the GOP, and the right wing to dismantle government at every single turn and basically doom our country for, decades. We don't even know the extent of the damage that the Trump administration is going to be having on America. But you're right, this does have creates an opening for somebody who has the right policies, who has the right ideas, that are actually going to help the American people, and we've got to take this opportunity. And I'm glad you're out there working to take this opportunity.
It is the time for progressives to raise their voice. Just do it in a way that's loving and respectful to the middle class, to let them know we have a lot more to offer them than what Republicans have in the past. We can win those people over without sacrificing any of our ideals. I taught for 5 years in a medium security prison in California, and Donald Trump reminds me of inmates that I taught. He's a pathological liar. I think you're right to call him a con man. He's a disaster for the people that he promised that he would help. We could see it with a health care plan, with the tax plan. His foreign policy is creating more problems, whether it's moving the the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, or uncritically supporting the Saudis. I mean, the policies there create more terrorism and less respect and trust for the United States. Trump doesn't seem to have any autocrat that he doesn't admire and want to meet with. When it comes to climate change, walking away from the Paris Accords really is a crime against humanity. And we're all going to be dealing with this more down the road. The Pentagon in 2003, here's something that I try to clarify to Republicans. The Pentagon said climate change was a greater threat to national security than terrorism, because they understood that it changed who was going to get the water. There was going to be more hurricanes and floods, and we've certainly seen that in the United States and Puerto Rico recently, but also more drought, wildfires like we're seeing in California, famines, floods, mass migrations, and political instability. Think floods in Pakistan, where the Taliban stepped into the breach to provide aid to people. Southern Sudan, the drought leading to war there, or the drought in northern Syria between 2006 and 2010, being a catalyst for the civil war there, or the drought in Yemen, or the droughts in northern Nigeria leading to Boko Haram gaining more traction. And this has been set off, and really our civilization is a force of nature that threatens our security. So the Republicans that have not spoken out against Trump's craziness and his recklessness for the future is just something that needs to be damned. Clearly, people need to see it for what it is. It is raw greed at the expense of humanity. It is a crime against humanity. And now's the time for bold progressives to speak out, and I think more people are listening.
Yeah, and I think you and I both agree that the only reasons the Republicans right now are letting Trump get away with it is because, well, they serve their donors. It's about giving the gigantic tax cuts and the deregulation that these corporations and these large donors have been pushing for a long time. I mean, the only Republicans that haven't spoken out, or I'm sorry, the Republicans that have spoken out against President Trump are only doing so when they're not running for office. So that, of course, gets back to the main issue of where they're getting their money and the fact that you can't serve two masters. So I think that's the most important issue that we have, is getting money out of politics, because it precludes every other issue. We can't actually solve the problem about the climate, which I'm going to be honest about the Paris Climate Accord. I thought it was weak. I thought it was a little weak. I criticized it, but also I said that it was a good step towards doing something else, towards transforming our energy system to being something that is based more on renewable energy and eliminating our dependence on fossil fuels. Trump reversing that. I mean, he has taken every modest step that we have made within the last, 8 years with President Obama. Let's just give that a start, right? And has reversed it. So I think, to me, that makes the case, and I think you'll agree with me on this one. That makes the case that we can no longer take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. We must be bold, we must be strong, we must be progressive, and we must push for these policies and push for a better future through these policies. I think you're with me on this one.
I completely agree. I'm ready for when you run for office and I get a chance to support you. I think unfortunately it had to get worse before more people woke up to what the impact of all of this would be. And I think that the time is now for us to organize in a different way and to be mindful that most change in this country comes from the grassroots up, and when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And folks are listening. I can attest to this even in rural South Carolina with conservatives. Once you get a chance to explain what's going on, our agenda is really a common sense for the common good that brings more liberty and justice for all, and they can get it. So it is time for us to raise our voices. I really think there's a crisis in the country, and it's time for us to be the change we wish to see.
I definitely agree with that. I think we do need to change, and it starts with, and this is, I know it's a hokey slogan, but I use it on my show every day. Change begins with you. And that's what we really want to kind of pound home on this show, is that you guys are the catalyst for change. You guys push for it. You guys, the volunteers, for example, on political campaigns, that's you guys. You knock on doors. You're the one out there, the ones out there that are talking about candidates. It's word of mouth. It's social media. It's all this. You are the catalyst for change, and you're the most important part of any political campaign and any political movement. And Bernie Sanders said, we need a political revolution. And that meant millions of people getting up and getting involved and running for office and supporting progressives who are also running for office. So that's like the biggest takeaway that I think anybody who's watching this interview should have, is that you guys are the revolution, and people like Mal, you're the guys that are, being pushed forward on the wave of the people.
Couldn't agree more. I think you run by organizing, organize to run. I was pleased to give a speech at our revolution in South Carolina. First conference, we had 150 people. My sense, it's going to be much, much larger the next time. I think there's a lot of traction. People are organizing with social media. They're understanding we're in a fight, and the only way you get better in a fight is you fight, and you learn by your mistakes, just as in battle you learn what you have to do to win and what you need to do to protect yourself. I submit, and I end with this in most of my speeches, what we're doing is not enough yet. We have to pray more, reflect more, read more, talk lovingly with others more, and organize more. And we are up to the battle, and the more we fight, the better we're going to be able to fight. The wind is at our back. The public is hungry for a change, and I think everything you said is right. They want the change to be against those who are the elites that are in power. They want more democracy. They want more changes for the working class. I mean, we're facing a digital revolution that shrunk the oceans to lakes. We're closer now to China in terms of trade, transportation, communication, and environment than South Carolina was to New York when the Constitution was signed. And we face transnational corporations that pledge allegiance to the best investment opportunity, while the rest of us are seeking to pledge allegiance to an economy and a country that creates dignity and opportunity and doesn't destroy the earth. It's our time to raise that message.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to share? Anything else you want to talk about before we head out, or you have the floor?
Well, this has been a great opportunity, and I think in the struggle, people underrate their ability to influence friends, neighbors through social media. I've noticed it's a little tough to get people out canvassing or to do voter registration, but if you're posting and sharing and trying to get good ideas out there to your friends and networking with other progressives, you're doing a lot. Everybody joins the fight in a different way, and social media has allowed this fight to take on different fronts, and I couldn't encourage it more. I'm delighted to have this chance to talk with folks, and I deeply believe this is going to be a wave election, and we have a chance to seize the political agenda and bring it forward. What Bernie Sanders has been talking about has been common sense in Europe and the center position for about 40 years, and I think we're finally at a point where we may get there if we're willing to fight for it.
One more thing. Isn't it crazy how that's the center position? How our politics has gone so far to the right, within the last 30, 40 years that something that is so common sense as healthcare for everybody, and even college that you could afford, is considered radical in this country.
Or a decent minimum wage, or decent public housing. I agree. I suppose I'll be quoted on this, but I do think Roger Ailes, in working for Fox, was kind of like an American Goebbels. He's a propagandist that was very clever, and they used some of the same tactics of repetition, delegitimizing the enemy, that the mainstream media is the enemy of the people, like the First Amendment's the enemy of the people, and it's fake news. I mean, this stuff came right out of Nazi propaganda. A constant attack, which was also a feature of that type of propaganda, and I don't want to push it too far, but he's been very effective, and we're fighting that. It's a cult-like following that it's tough to break through to, and we'll have to be more creative in our experiments in democracy, in making plain what is in the interest of the working class. And I think we can do that. Social media can help us out.
And I think what helps that argument is people know when they're not getting a fair deal. People know when they're getting screwed. And people know what's fair and what's not fair. And so there's that sense within the working class. I was a member of the working class. So I worked in a factory for years. I worked in retail, so I've done all that stuff. And there is an inherent, I've been a union member, I've been a non-unionized member. So, and let me tell you, being in a union was so much better than being in a non-unionized company, because you actually did have rights and you had protections, and I had better pay and I had better benefits. That's the thing that unions bring to you. And so, as a member, as a former member of the working class at least, now I'm more of the media class, I guess, although I don't feel like it. I can say that people know fairness, and people want what's best for their families, and look, they want to do a good job at their company too. And so, going back to what you were talking about with Ailes and Fox News and the right wing, they've demonized unions ever since Reagan broke them, and union membership has declined. It's probably at its lowest level it's been in a century. And there are huge economic ramifications for that decline in membership. And that's why we see stagnant wages. That's why we see a lack of benefits at work. That's why there are employers that can get away with stealing wages from their workers. And, people know that unfairness, and they may not know whose fault it is or who's going to fight against that. And that's, of course, the work of the politicians to say that, hey, I will fight against that. And I will make sure that you are treated fairly at work. And, that's a message that you have to send is, I'm working for you, and this is what I'm going to do for you. Because, again, people know fairness, and they want to know that their politician is looking out for them. And right now, understandably, they don't trust a lot of politicians because of what they've done in Washington, as you've pointed out.
You summed it up well. In South Carolina, 2% of the workers are in unions at this point, so they're very weak, and their ideas are terrific for the working class, from working conditions to wages to benefits, but their message doesn't get out there very easily. They're pretty much frozen from the mainstream media. I always ask my students to look out on Labor Day to see if they see any stories about the plight of working people, and usually they don't. And then I say, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a labor lawyer debating a corporate lawyer? Wouldn't that be fiery on TV? That would get ratings. It's not a matter of ratings. They want to shut down the debate. And he's successfully done that because it's part of class warfare to oppress people and get their wealth off the expense of working people. I have people on the campaign trail on minimum wage that are crying because they can't support their families. This was referred to as Martin Luther King as a crime in this wealthy nation for people to work for starvation wages. And he said it in Memphis to defend the sanitation workers. And you know, if you calculate the cost of living then and now, minimum wage now is lower than it was back in 1968. Still a crime, and we can't get that discussion in the mainstream media. So we've got to find creative ways like your podcast and social media and organizing in any way we can, and the message will resonate. I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's a long fight. It's definitely a difficult fight, but you know that more than anybody else, because it sounds like you've been fighting this fight for a very, very long time.
Started walking precincts for Robert Kennedy, worked for Tom Bradley when he ran for mayor, and worked full time for governor. I think one of my epiphanies was being in the Middle East. Before the war in '73, I got to talk to Palestinians and had a sense that the country was wrong with what we were doing in the Middle East, and decided to try to teach. I suppose another epiphany when I taught in a state prison in California, learned a lot from the inmates about what caused despair and hopelessness, which typically would hit them about the age of 11, 12, and 13. So been on this journey for a while and trying to make things as plain as I can. And I do think people are listening more than they have at any time since the late 60s.
And it's a perfect opportunity, like I said, to be able to talk to people and to be able to show them that, hey man, there's a better way, and this is how we can get there. And definitely there's definitely a better way than President Trump's way. That's for sure.
Folks are listening now. I couldn't encourage people more. This is our moment. There is the political opening. The elites have been delegitimized, and the Republicans have been delegitimized, and the mainstream wing of the Democratic Party couldn't get elected and couldn't get much done. So it's our time.
All right. Mal Hyman, where can my audience find you and help out with your campaign?
Thanks. I've got a website, Mal Hyman for Congress, and a Facebook page.
And also, you're on Twitter as well, right?
Right,
Mal
I am on
for
Twitter. Thanks.
Congress, right, with a
Yes.
4. So
Yep.
we'll put those links in the description of this video as well. But Mal Hyman, thank you so much for joining me today. Awesome discussion. I really enjoyed talking about the issues with you. You have a lot of experience fighting for, progressive values, and so maybe we'll have you on again before the campaign, or maybe afterwards. If you end up beating Tom Rice, which I definitely hope so. So thank you again, Mal. Definitely appreciate you having you on the show, and thank you for your time.